hopefully this works. Apparently Scottish computers don't plug in as well, but great stuff. It's great to be here. And what's this afternoon about? Well, it's an opportunity for me to talk about this thing called digital transformation in our built environment, and what lessons can we learn from the programme that's in the UK. Now, I will say I will be on time because apparently there's a football match on tonight, and I will be going to see it. I don't know who I think is going to win it. But we've been on this journey right from the very beginning with CITA as well, working, trying to get this message out, talking about a better built environment. And I always remember when Alan said it, come across and find out what BIM's about in Ireland. And I remember Googling it, and this is what I got, so. And actually I think it's got an important message. BIM means many different things to different people, and they're not all wrong with what it means. And I'll try and build up on last year's talk at the gathering, which was the Mrs. Doyle inspired one of, go on, just do it. So we'll try and tell a different message this year. But this is me. I'm David Philp. I work as part of this thing called the UK BIM Task Group, which is this world of government working together with industry and academia, trying to improve this vision of a digitised built environment. Okay, who am I? Well, work with it, that's me. You probably struggle with my plummy London accent, but I will try and speak slowly so you understand. But actually, I'm proud of working with the task group. You kind of look at the key things that I think we've got. I think we've got some vision. We look at this sort of thing in terms of BIM, what it can do to improve, and as you've heard from Alison and the team at Class Road, what's it look like for the next generation, the legacy we're going to leave? Well, weapon of choice, Kobe, it's a big part for us, starting to think about these digital transactions in the built environment. Well, that's the nemesis. We're starting to think about a whole move away from that world of analog transactions to one of digital, that complete switch. And we're lucky, we get to travel a fair bit, we get across here, we get all around the world to see where things are doing. And I think we're starting to see that big step change. BIM's been adopted all around the world. We're seeing governments, clients, starting to think about even giving some financial stimulus to all these things, but starting to think more and more about BIM deliverables, mandating it, encouraging it. And my assertion is actually, when it comes to BIM, it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when, and are you going fast enough? And I think it's very much about that whole, in terms of technology, that automation. If something can be automated, I think ultimately it will. And I think it's a big question, why should BIM be important to Ireland? Well, I'm glad to say, I didn't actually have to say it, it came from the kids. We're probably going through one of the most exciting times, I think, in our whole construction environment. This whole digital economy, it shapes everything we do in all our lives. And you think, why should construction be exempt? It will be touched by it, and this is the biggest challenge we've got. Not just BIM, but it's that whole switch from analog to digital, and it's a big part of what we're trying to do. I think wherever we go, we're seeing the importance of the data sets that we're building. We start to talk today about retooling, these digital tool sets. We start to talk about geospatial. We start to talk about sensor-rich assets. We start to think more and more about monitoring, real-time data feedback, but it's starting to revolutionise a big cultural change about the way we think about how our assets operates. And we're starting to see different ways of actually thinking. Start to think more and more about how BIM gives us better outcomes in terms of what we're doing. We're starting to see us gathering huge amounts of data in terms of what's going on. In fact, it's quite interesting, High Speed 2 is going to be the next big project in Europe, and I think it's worth about 18 billion. And they worked out at the end of the construction period, if you used traditional DVDs, stacked them up, and then it'd be higher than Mount Fuji. So, gathering a huge amount of data, but data shouldn't be gathered for the sake of it. It's how we use it and how we exploit it. And I think the big part that BIM and the digital transformation for us, it's about creating a more efficient built environment, one that's more sustainable, starting to think more and more about a carbon agenda, and ultimately it's about better places to live with intelligent infrastructure. So when we talk about BIM, I always like to think it as being that verb, creating and managing all these digital things that we're doing. But it should always be about a better outcome. It should be outcome driven in terms of what we're doing. The digital transformation in the UK, I think it's gone through a series of stages for us. We kind of started with this thing, start to build some digital competence. People get the knowledge and skills and tool set. We start to get some degree of literacy. We start to think about lean processes, lean way of working. And I think it's now we're coming to that third stage, digital transformation. We're actually starting to get better innovation and better ways of working. And I think that's a big thing for me. BIM doesn't give you any value. It's what BIM enables so many different things to actually come out of it. And I think that's a really important point. And what we're starting to see is this thing called digitisation. We're starting to see more and more smart ways of working. It's starting to simulate innovation within the supply chain. We are generally taking the waste out of what we're doing. I see leading projects back in the UK mainline, Crossrail, I think in terms of what they're doing, that project we built several times, built in the model, it'll be simulated, it'll be coordinated, it'll be optimised, it'll be built on site with the waste taken out. And it's a big part of what we're doing. So in the UK, I think we're starting to reach that digital transformation tipping point. We're starting to get the value out of it. We've done the retooling, we're learning our lessons, we're changing our processes. And I think we're starting to think about that world of transformative. We're not just trying to build the meta mousetrap, but we're starting to think more and more about dynamic, disruptive by design. I like to think actually we're starting to disrupt how we're procuring and operating our assets in much, much more rapid feedback cycles in terms of what we're doing. And I think this is the sort of journey that we went on in terms of UK. We started with our green dot back in 2011, and we're seeing the innovative early adopters creating disruptive methods. Often SMEs, quick, very agile, can adapt pretty quickly. And we start to see some degree of growth, and we start to see these early adopters starting to think new models that may be procuring things, offering clients new ways of working that we hadn't thought about. And then we start to see some of the more advanced incumbents start to think about adopting as well. They're looking back and saying, well, some smart thing going off. And that's probably where we were maybe about a year ago. We're starting to see more and more mainstream take-up of this thing called BIM. And that's where we're probably at today. You know, over in Dublin, we're reaching that tipping point where we're maybe starting to see laggard incumbents start to drop off. And we're not talking about people doing BIM, but not getting the better value propositions at digital transformation. And I think we'll start to see more and more in the next couple of years that digitised construction starting to become the new norm. So we're very much in terms of a journey in terms of BIM. I think it's a big thing. I don't think it's got an end. It will keep growing in terms of what it means. But what we are seeing is more and more starting to think about virtual asset lifecycle model. That synthesis, if you like, of the virtual production, analysis, evaluation. But, and there's the big part for me, it's the optimization of that asset. Starting to think more and more about the behavioural solutions and how we start to realise those solutions much more early in that process. So smarter, more well-informed designs and that collaborative. So, you know, the term we're using now is build better before built. Starting to build very much in that virtual environment and the optimization. And I think we mentioned, we heard from Raphael about lean working. We're seeing the supply chain now think more and more about concurrent engineering, working together. You know, on the right-hand side, there's Stanford University with their sci-fi course. And there's a small architectural practice in London. You know, it's grown from 4 to 16 David Miller architects. And you can start to see they're using concurrent workflows at the heart of their process, the heart of their practice. They're starting to use, I call it the digital campfire. People getting around, sharing information, and we're starting to see much more faster, if you like, to be able to answer these questions in terms of what we're doing. So we're starting to see a supply chain that's thinking more and more about concurrent or integrated ways of working. What we are seeing, though, is, you know, what we're now calling digital Darwinianism. You know, the technologies are starting to move very, very fast. They're growing all the time. And we're starting to see in terms of, you know, the UK, you know, are they moving faster in the culture and processes? That's a big challenge for us. We've got a big analogue, if you like, baggage out there. We've got lots of baggage in terms of our industry. And actually the biggest thing we've got to think about evolution is back to very much that cultural change as well. And we're starting to ask the question now, you know, okay, so that those that don't evolve, you know, will they be beta maxed out? The folk that can't get the value propositions. And that's a big question for us. You know, do you start to create a two-tier society, those that get it and those that don't? So we've got to make sure that BIM is not just a mega project, it's for all to play. So a big part of the UK is making sure that we can create a platform that everybody can play their part in. And I think the motivation for BIM's changed in the UK as well. You know, you went back a couple of years, 2011, the big motivation was on the left-hand side, the pull, the client demand for this. Clients were saying, okay, we've got a mandate, but now we're starting to see more and more the right-hand side, actually the supply chain saying, actually, this is good for us. It's got performance improvement, we're reducing our delivery risk, we can actually start to transact upon the BIM data to make smart decisions, and we're optimising asset performance, so actually we can give new procurement routes for our clients. Big part still about winning work. You know, they're giving people out there just now competitive advantage. And at the same time, you know, they're seeing competitors starting to do their own things, starting to think about new innovative ways of working. I think it's kind of what's expected of us. You know, you look around this room today, and I think we're all industry leaders. We want to leave a better legacy for the next generation. Because I tell you, they get it. You've seen it today. So, Alison, can you stand up? Yeah. Please speak to Alison, because I mean, this is why I think we should be doing BIM. It is about leaving a better legacy. And Alison, I think the guys are doing work. These kids get it, don't they? Yeah. And they get collaboration. And that's the big thing. I think we've got to think more and more about learning from them. T-shaped learning, learn more and more about the built environment, I think is really important. You sit down, Alison, thank you for that. I'm actually Alison's agent, so I get 10% for the fact she actually stood up there. But we are starting to see more of a move from, I think, the pull to the push in terms of the UK. And I think we're starting to reimagine what the built environment looks like. And I think that's really quite exciting. We're starting to see the digital client. Well, that's quite interesting for a client. That's kind of stress tested. We were never very good at procuring things in the first place. But they're now having to start with the end in mind. What data do they need to actually operate this asset? So we're starting to see clients thinking more and more about computational information requirements. Wow, there's a new skill for them and their technical teams. We're starting to see more and more the digital designer. And I think the digital designer's thinking more and more, not just about the aesthetic, but actually they've got data now that's going to give them better outcomes, better social outcomes, better behavioural outcomes, but an asset that performs much better, and they've got the data for it. The digital contractor, I think, is changing as well. We're seeing them becoming more of an integrator, getting the supply chain around much earlier in the thing. And starting to see more and more about a lean way of working. You heard from Raphael about how BIM and lean coming together in terms of what they're doing, much more agile processes. And I think for me, the data flows are much faster as well. The feedback loop comes much faster. And the big part, the digital FM provider, the big important part, the asset provider that can start to think more and more about real-time post-occupancy evaluation and start to think about better outcomes. And I think we're starting to see at last a move to this part, and this is the exciting part for me, starting to see more and more about business model simulations, start to virtually test the business workflows, which your shop floor could be the construction project, it could be your office, but we start to simulate how things are doing. So we're starting to see things like serious gamification come into the way we're doing things, not just being able to explore, but actually test and try out your built environment. I think it's fair to say in the UK, and I think around the world, this thing data is becoming the new oil for a built environment. And I think oil can be valuable if you get it right, but at the same time it could ruin your holiday if you get it wrong and all this goopy stuff comes up. So we've got to become good at actually buying our data, managing it, and actually getting some outcomes from it. And I think that's a big thing. This digital data has got massive value, and I'm sure it has for Ireland already. We're starting to see things in terms of open data. There's huge, huge value in it. And this is some of the prize in the UK and the mainland. Our construction economy is worth 6.75%. 90 odd billion a year, over 100 million euro, if you like, 100 billion euro. And you think, we're trying to transform what we do. And there's a big prize. There's almost 12 trillion out there of investment that, everybody wants to leverage it. Well, how do you do that? You get better outcomes. And you can see there in the UK, economists have actually estimated that there's going to be 30 billion of digital services by 2020. So it's really important, I think, to countries that you can be at the forefront, the vanguard of not just doing BIM, but getting much more efficient ways of working out there. So it's imperative to be at the forefront of there, to unlock some of that 12 trillion that's going to be out there. Well, and a big part of that, I think, is about open data. You see it everywhere, you've seen it today, you can start to mine all these data things. I was with one of my colleagues yesterday, he's got an architectural practice in London, he works for it, and he said we had 2 new recruits this week. One was an astrophysicist and one was a mathematician. They can write algorithms, they can query big data sets. So I think it's starting to change the way we're doing. And that's a big thing. When we started this programme, we had a simple hypothesis, and it's probably those last 4 words that are really important. Open, shareable asset information. If we use that, can you make better decisions that are going to give you better value for money, but also better, if you like, more sustainable altruistic outcomes in terms of carbon? So we started that with a simple hypothesis that we wanted to test. And a big part of that was around about that open data standard. And I think that's a big thing for us. It's more about the open data than the big data, because we think there's real value in there, and the open data starts to very much stimulate innovation within the supply chain. And the open data for us in terms of the government, I think, is really important, because it starts to create transparency, it starts to create efficiency, that's the way we spell it in Scotland, and I think you get better social outcomes from it as well. And I think it starts to drive that social inclusion. And the big part, it actually gives, there's a huge value in terms of that economic value of all that data sets as well. And people start to become quite entrepreneurial. You put it out there, hackathons, folk can do great stuff with it, and more for less. And I think how we use that data, I think, is generally becoming game-changing. We started out with a very simple hypothesis in terms of what we were going to do. We had a simple mission, and this was literal. When we came into the programme, in terms of government, there was no money left. So it was a big imperative. We actually tried to save money, and we were living in a war economy. You had assets back then, in terms of the crisis. Things had to last longer, perform, but actually, so you had two horses to ride. The economic, that monetary one, but also starting to think about asset performance, which was key as well. So very simple message for us. This thing in terms of outcome, cost king, carbon screen. It was as simple as that, very clear, and I think that was great, having very clear, concise targets. And there it was, go out, save 20% in capital costs by 2016, and give us some better carbon solutions, and start to think about assets longer to perform better. Nice, clear, simple, and I think that's really important, to us as the industry, having clear, concise targets. So we started to build this together. Am I so hot at this presentation? I'm putting my arms up. But this is a model that we started to build. Number one was we had to start thinking about creating a supply chain that had capability to deliver. And that's a big thing we always still test. We had defined information requirements. We actually said, this is when we want information. So start to become very good at prescribing when information is actually needed. If I don't get home to this football tonight, I'll be very unhappy. We also buy, and the big part, everybody talked about IP, but we start to get clients to think more and more about what they want to use data for and buying the rights to use their data. And we've done this, it's through a protocol, and that's a key document for us, putting this thing called BIM around a commercial wrapper. Agreed modeled outputs. Well, a big part of that for us was about, and we're defining this at the moment, both, we call it level of definition, which is an amalgam of level of detail, geometrical description, and LOI, level of information, non-graphical. So for us, level of detail plus level of information equals level of definition. So as a big part for us was describing the non-geometrical data set as well, which was really quite key. We also had to define process for information delivery, making sure everybody is working to the same process, getting consistency in what we're doing. And we agreed the data exchange standards. Again, thinking about open data standards for us, we knew how much the world loved Kobe, so it was axiomatic that we'd go down that route, a bit tongue-in-cheek, but that's the way we have gone. And this builds upon what Laura says this morning. This is what we're starting to see, the BIM workflow. And I think that's a traditional workflow we're seeing. Okay, what does that really mean for us? Well, it probably meant that the client was buying their data maybe 5, 6, 7 times. You imagine a project such as a cross-sale, if we're doing that, there's a huge cost. And we're starting to now, we've got plans of work that are starting to have, if you like, that home run. We're starting to think about learning from our assets. We're thinking more and more about strategic briefing. And we're starting to see that information growth has been really key for us in terms of that life cycle. Don't read that slide in terms of anything, but it's just trying to explain the client role within the BIM workflows. Clients becoming very good at describing their queries, what we call plain language questions, what might be, can I afford it? Does it fit in my site? Does it meet my technical standards? And then we turn that into a computational requirement. We want to mine the models to answer questions for us. That's really quite key. And the big thing to remember is you're probably all employers. You step down information to all levels of the supply chain. So we've all got to start to think more and more with that client hat on and start to think about becoming really good at describing data. Okay, this is really good, but if it doesn't give you any value, don't do it. Well, we started our program back in 2011, and it was part of a government construction strategy. And I think that was key. It wasn't about BIM in isolation. We've now saved 1.4 billion, and there was a hypothesis. That's what we said, 20% saving. Not a case of buy 5 schools, get 2 free. If that starts to improve your economy, you're actually putting more money back into construction as well. You're creating more jobs for that. So at a macro level, a huge imperative. So the benefits that we are now realising, CapEx, we're saving 20% against a benchmark. We tried to work out benchmark at the beginning. We're getting better understanding and decision making. We're getting, you heard it today, better stakeholder buy-in. We're getting better outcomes. And the big part is industry rebranding. As you've seen it today, we are creating an industry that's much more innovative. It's something that people want to come into. That was a trial project, Young Offenders Institute. How many folk have been at Young Offenders Institute? Get your hand up. Alan, who I know you're lying, get your hand up. Okay. It was a Young Offenders Institute. And we worked really hard with the client, testing our model, the digital transactions. I don't know how well you can see it, but cost savings achieved 20%. Not 20% in the context of the contractor having to save 20%, but the client making smarter decisions, better design, better procurement, and we got better collaboration. We got soft landings. Big part, we mandated soft landings as well, joining CapEx and OpEx together. Really essential. We saw more innovation, we got our sense, so we got better for less. Since then, our Ministry of Justice has now £600 million worth of level 2 projects in the pipeline. And I wanted to share this. This is just something that came out last week. This is our government construction strategy, all these elements together. I don't know how I can see that. You can start to see all the departments there. It's minus 10% down to minus 20. You can see the worst savings we got is minus 12%. And we're regularly cementing with early adopters now 20% savings. Again, not the supply chain having to save 20%, but the right through in terms of what that looks like, the client making better decisions, better procurement. And we've now got over 10 billion euros of level 2 projects in the public sector pipeline in terms of UK. We're starting to see, if you like, the Smart Clients, Ministry of Justice. You can start to see what they're doing. They're starting to digitise. They're building all components in spaces, and that's helping standardisation, standard assemblies, and it's driving down cost. People are starting to think more and more about smarter programme times. It's saving prelim costs, but it's also driving up value in the operation. And they're getting ready to set up a business called MOJ Global to start selling their digital components worldwide. And start to think, I've gone less hot now, but you start to think what that starts to do for you. You can start to think about moving from where they are now to actually self-procurement. You can get a framework contractor to actually put rates against each of these objects. You can start to generate some automatic design around about it. So they're going for a huge transformation in what they're doing. And the big part we're starting to see is starting to think about, what does this do to the supply chain? This centralised approach we've had, does it help drive adoption? And what we saw, Hill McGraw survey, I think they're quite good, but we're showing that, we've got much higher adoption than the US. Hurrah! But, not like rubbing in anybody's faces, but, I thought it was good, but I thought that was the most important. You've got a government mandate that said actually 76% say inspired them to initiate a specific BIM project. So somebody's saying actually by mandating it, we said actually we've got to give this a go. I thought that was really quite important. And 66% were encouraged to add BIM resources to their organisation. So a quite innovative vision saying actually guys, this is going to be required. People started to do it and we're starting to drive higher levels of adoption, I think anywhere, by having that centralised. We're quite lucky because actually the UK is quite small and having that centralised approach was actually pretty easy. This is High Speed 2, as we mentioned, it's going to be the biggest job in Europe, and they've done this study that actually said, are the supply chain ready, not just in the UK mainland, but throughout Europe. And we carried out a survey with 303 organisations in terms of the maturity level. A lot of it was audited. You can start to see that now we've got over 56% of the supply chain saying they weren't there as an organisation, but they had early adopter projects that were now within that level 2 environment. They also said 71% were now making some financial provision for BIM, either at an organisational level or within tenders, and 60% had BIM strategy with defined goals. So we're starting to see a huge uptake and people starting to move up that ramp into that common world of level 2 in terms of what we're doing. But I think we're starting to see that thing, the BIM Marmite, that added value it's starting to give us as well. And I think, I remember, I think he was across here a few times, Paul Morrell, I don't know, was Paul across now? Paul told at the start, he said, this thing, BIM, it's about, people love the 3D bit, people love the sort of geometry and modelling about. He says, that is going to be their Trojan horse. That's going to get us in there sort of thing. And actually, I think it has, because what we're seeing, BIM in its various guises, and it does have various guises, it's helping set a vision of what a digitised sector look like, and one that can actually use computer readable data. And I like this as a good friend of ours over in Milan, and this is what he said, that we can see a construction industry that builds right first time, has got good productivity, and we start to create buildings that gives individuals in society the added value they want. And I thought that's fantastic, and I think that's sort of me, it's starting to give you that beacon of actually what industry could look like. So how do you actually go best do this then? This is a bit in terms of our journey plan. Well, we kind of started off, with a report. I actually started with life within a carbon report. We then, government got together and said, right, if you think this is good, go and write a strategy. Show us where the benefits and the value for money were. So we had a strategy document and eventually synthesised its way, not into BIM in isolation, I think this is really key, but a government construction strategy. A very cohesive strategy of how industry and government will work together. And this is us back at the very beginning. And I think this is probably the most important thing we learned. This guy on the left, he's not looking a bit happy there, but this is Paul Morrell. Paul was our chief construction advisor. Now, Paul was very good at giving vision and herding the cats together, if you like. He was very good in terms of giving that leadership, showing people that value in terms of BIM. So having a chief construction advisor, hugely important. Having that leadership team, people going out, as we're doing today, telling people that there's a better way of doing things is hugely important. And I think we've been quite lucky, we've had a compelling vision. Our politicians have really bought into it, and saying actually, they're all putting their own sort of thoughts onto this now as well. But actually it's a whole sector approach, and we want to be at the vanguard of this. We really want to be leading in terms of this BIM journey. And, I think that's the thing. We won the FIATEC award, industry and government working well together. It was really important. And that was us over, I picked it up over in Texas, and I got a new Stetson and some hats, but it was really important, you know, for industry. Actually, it was about us working well together. And I thought that was a really good message in what we're doing. We articulated our mission. That was our 6-point plan. Create a wrapper. The wrapper was the policies, the standards. We wanted to raise awareness and adoption. We wanted to test hypotheses. This does actually work. And create that global leadership and create a solid foundation to move from collaboration to digital integration and leave a strong legacy. You know, that were the 6 things that we wanted to do. And the first things we said, well, we can't afford to get stuck in the long grass with this. We've got to leave the complexity of the tool set, the retooling, and that innovation to the supply chain. We've got to become very good at being specific with deliverables from BIM. So we've got to become very good at defining what we're doing. We've also got to make sure that clients use the data. Imagine we're saying, let's go and produce all this data, and then suddenly no one uses it. So we have to measure where clients are actually using the data sets, what to provide a support infrastructure, the task group, and take small significant steps. We have a very staged, if you like, program in terms of what we're doing and have clear targets. Level 2 by 2016. Very simple in terms of what we're doing. With a 10-point plan to actually test things, I had to bring value, people had to understand it, had to be non-proprietary, competitive, open. So we had to actually test it. You know, we tested it against these things to ensure that everybody could play their part. It was open, and it still actually gave competition within the supply chain. And I think, you know, this is a quote from NBS. I don't know how many folk know Stephen Hamill, read his blog. But does anybody know the wedge? I think everybody, hands up, do you know the wedge is? You don't have to say the BIM wedge anymore, do you? Everybody knows the wedge. I was over in Warsaw and said, anybody know what the wedge is? And oh, hands are up sort of thing. And I think that's been really good for us, because actually we're not talking about apples and oranges. Everybody knows what level 2 BIM is. So a big part for us was actually describing these stages of maturity and being able to measure on it. I think that was really quite important. So, and I think it's great that everybody actually knows what, you know, level 2 is by now. And that was our definition of level 2, but it's a series of models, domain models. But for me, it's this last sentence. It's about defined, validated outputs, so validation, big part of level 2, that give outputs for digital data transaction. We want to transact upon the data, and we want these information exchanges actually in a reusable form. We want to use our data for many different purposes. So we've got, if you like, a definition of what it meant. We started to build the standards around about it that are going to allow consistency, information management, something to inject it into the contract or protocol document. We had soft landings. We mandated soft landings to join CapEx and OpEx up. The role of the soft landings champion was mandated. We also mandated BS 1192 Part 4 COBE to start get consistency in terms of what we're doing. Because that was a big part for us. The open data made sure everybody can play their part. We wanted to create, I will not call it a handbag, but this man bag that carries things. You know, you've got your different compartments within there. You put classifications, phases, value, and carry things all the way through. And this is what we created. This is our model. You can see on the right-hand side in the red there, the diamonds, the client decision points, and how all the data comes way back at an atomic level from a manufacturer. So we had to make sure that all that data could actually be stepped up and the manufacturers could play their part. We've got 2 working groups in the UK. We've got BIM for M squared, BIM for manufacturers and manufacturing, the strategic manufacturers firm, because we know the important at getting these people to supply their data and step it up for each of their stages. We had to start with the end in mind, and the big thing was we had a program. We had this task group that weren't going to be there forever, but we wanted to create a digital transformation that would be. So essentially, that we had, you know, we wanted to get industry to get, you know, with the stabilizers on, working with them to get there in terms of, you know, sustain that. But I think they're coming off now, and I think we're reaching that fulcrum that, you know, in terms of a task group, government's done all they can. You know, April next year, the standards are there, we've tested it, and I think we're seeing it more going over to industry now to start to lead that agenda. And I think that's a really important part of what we're doing. It's about working with the industry. And you know what? It's about having a bit of fun as well. See, when you go out there, I think when you go around all the countries, if you can't have the crack, then I think there's something wrong. It should be fun. This thing called BIM, we should have a bit of a laugh at it. We're changing the industry. We're doing so much better. And this is a big part of our program. We've got 30 groups now. We call them BIM for groups. I chair them. BIM for clients. We've got all the private sector clients. We've got BIM for SME. And we make them sign all this charter about working together. We share knowledge. And I think that's fantastic. You know, we're starting to create these communities of practice, people willing to share. And that was the last time we were across at the gathering at one of these things, what do you call it? a lock-in, but which was very nice. Okay, I might not have got many of my things, but I did get a pint that's certified. I can craft the perfect pint of Guinness now, so, which is awarded to the BIM task group, so it's up there with our achievements. So. We've also made investment as well in terms of what we're doing. You know, we're finalising our classification system. Uniclass 2 is going to be the core classification, but mapping to other classifications such as NRM. That'll be complete by April next year. And we've also invested this thing in the digital plan of work that you'll start to see coming out, the phase rollout from that from April next year. It's not, if you like, a mandate in itself, the tool, but the outcomes and what it does are. So a big part, I'll show you a very quick, but this is a mock-up of it. But what you can do at the very beginning, if you like, is start to load up, your project with it in terms of all your objects, and you can start to, I'll get to move on a bit, but you can start to create this plan of work. You maybe put your pile caps in or such like, and see solar heating system, who's responsible, whom, when, and you can start to see there the level of non-graphical information is shown there as an A, B, C, D, and the LOI, the LOD, which is shown as a 1, 2, 3, 4. We're working that just now, so start to be able to define and create and digitise a master information delivery plan, upload specifications, and also to be able to validate. It's got an IFC validator on it as well. So, and that's a free tool that'll go out to industry. So Innovate UK, what the task group has invested over £8 million into free tools for industry as well. And I think that's going to be a bit of a game changer in what it does. Connecting the dots, we've created this EU BIM working group, and I think it's a big part to say on the 15th of January, the EU public procurement said this thing called BIEM, Building Information Electronic Modelling. So starting to encourage use of that throughout, and you'll start to see people now potentially putting it in legal framework. So we're out there for colleagues across the member states trying to work, because we think this thing called BIM is better together. And it's starting to create a lot of borderless trading in terms of what we're doing. That was across again in Poland, a couple of weeks ago. Everybody is starting to move in terms of this journey, and we're all learning lessons from others. And I think the big thing is to see it's still about a behavioural change in what we're doing. We're also starting to think to the future as well now, in terms of what does that construction industry look like, both in the future, near future, and then as we head towards maybe 2025. We've got an industrial strategy. It's been laid out, and it's got 4 key tenets in it. We're starting to think about not just CapEx, but lower whole life costs, 33%, more sustainable, but that's the bit that I'm interested in, faster delivery by 50%. How do you do that? Well, there's no one way of doing it, but you start to think about different things coming together, more standardisation, design for manufacture, the regulatory process, start to automate some of the regulatory process, and start to even think about, like nanosecond procurement of our assets. You start to bring these things together. I think the 50% of delivery savings is certainly something that could be realistic in nature. And again, it's about an industry that comes technologically advanced in terms of what we're doing. And we're starting to think about changes as well. This is level 2. We're starting to think about the term TOTEX, total expenditure thinking. Clients are starting to think not just about the piggy bank of CapEx or OpEx, but that whole better decision making right across that whole project life cycle. And this will be the level 3 data set, start to plug in operational data and performance data. And then we move to level 4, which we're starting to think about social and behavioural. So we're starting to add on all these data sets. Also making sure that each of them still works in operation. You don't want people to build data for level 2, and that you can't actually lose it when we move towards level 3. And you can start to see it articulated a bit better there. We were saying actually, there's maybe 20% of our costs are around about that delivery phase, the concept, design and build. There's probably about 80% of the cost in operate, and that's probably level 2. But when we start to see when we move through to that level 3, organisational business operations, we reckon it's about 300% within there. You think of the legacy, you're on a train station for X, a huge amount in there, but we know our big part is when we get to level 4, where social performance, in terms of our schools, our hospitals, our railway, we reckon there's 3,000% when it's multiplied through society. So we're starting to get to that macroeconomic message when we start to reach level 4. I chaired a group in the UK, it was called BIM 2050 for young professionals, and we tried to see what that kind of looked like being going on that paradigm. And we had what we call the waves, if you like. So we had wave level 2 BIM, which we're doing just now, collaborative. Level 3, we start to think more and more about integration. And we're saying, well, that's maybe gets the first kick-off project, maybe about 2018, an early adopter. And then we're thinking about telemetry, spines, integrated RFID chips. And then we start to think about level 4 as well, where we're starting to think more and more about self-assembly, industrial 3D printing. And we're saying, actually, we reckon that was maybe a paradigm threshold when you get to level 5. You're starting to think about maybe the self-healing technologies, autonomous vehicles, in terms of what that looks like. And we're saying actually Moore's law might have some influence as well, but we'll start to see eventually, maybe 2050, more and more move to quantum computing. But the big part that was really interesting is when you get to there, the carbon, we saw a slowdown in gross fixed capital, and we see more non-additive construction, i.e. become more and more thinking about, especially in cities, the cost of carbon, you won't knock things down, you will come think more and more about retrofitting of what we're doing. So we'll start to use that data to think more and more about how we adapt what we're doing. And this is a bit I think is really interesting. This is some of the things we found. This is level 2, which is a deterministic approach in terms of what we're doing. And the data sets in terms of feedback wave, think about your projects. The time you maybe, you federate a model, you start to actually, you make a decision. It's often a feedback wave that's maybe 3 weeks out of date. And what we're seeing is moving from level 2 to level 3, we're getting to the point that becomes absolute. We're starting to see more and more convergent data. And we're getting to that point that I think when we get to level 3, we're going to think more probabilistic relational databases to maybe taking data in from the Met Office. We are starting to think about what does that mean in terms of your performance, your heating. And I think for us, the whole program level 2 is probably doing what we should be doing, but in a digitised environment. But level 3, I think we see the dawn of that new construction area. And we'll start to think more and more about self-procurement perhaps. We'll maybe see more and more of a move, and it's been said already today, relational or performance-based contracting, because we've got that data that's real-time, we can make smart decisions, it's outcome-based. This is some work we are doing with KPMG. We're looking, well, what does tomorrow's needs look like in that digital construction environment? We'll start to see a need for decisions at lightning speed. We can't have feedback waves that are 3-4 weeks out of date. We'll start to see more and more the rise of the nano corporate procurement as well. That real-time procurement is going to be needed. And the role of the CFIO, that Chief Financial Information Officer, someone in your organisation that's going to make real-time decisions. And at the same time, the Chief Uncertainty Officer, somebody going to the model environment and find out where's all that risk still there and use the model to take that out. So we'll see a new emergent roles. I never thought I'd be doing a job in terms of BIM. We're starting to see more and more people coming in from other industries now in terms of what we're doing. So what will career paths start to look like as we move to level 3 as well? And I think we're learning from others all the time. We're starting to see things like the Internet of Things. People often ask me in the street, Dave, how do you stay so fit? And I show them things like my Fitbit, this Internet of Things. And you can buy my fitness video if you do want, it is available, it's €20. But we're starting to see, you look at a racing car, it's got, 186 sensors in there, constantly feeding back data to the driver, to the pit crew. And you start to think about intelligent assets that are going to be doing exactly the same thing, sending things back in terms of the pump sets, not just a binary pass or fail, but in terms of those performance data as well. So level 3 BIM for us is going to start to think more and more about telemetry, start to think about RFID tags, performance, and operation of assets. I mentioned our Manufacturer Strategic BIM Forum. We've got organisations in there such as Tata Steel, Saint-Gobain, Lafarge, who are now saying, what would happen if we start to put these sensors into materials such as asphalt and such like? Can we start to work out real time when wearing courses are starting to degrade? We're doing it already. You can start to see the pile cage there with sensors in it. So we're speaking more and more to our assets in real time. And for level 3, well, it opens up lots of questions. Again, this is you think about your journey in Ireland. We're having to think more and more about embedded sensor technology, the different interface systems, not just in terms of software, but hardware as well. The interoperability of these operating systems. Where do we store it all? How do we do it safely? We've now got a new standard that we're going to have next year, PAS 1192 Part 5, which is about mindful security in the digital environment. All these different languages, all these ontologies, and the big part as well. Level 2, everybody still works in the domain, it's collaborative. When you get to level 3, it is that single model environment. So if we see more and more integrated contracts and integrated insurance, and they're the big challenges in what we're doing as well. And I think we'll start to see more in level 3, thinking about construction economics that are more outcome-based, might be in terms of clinical performance, and a bit more power by the hour, if you like. I was told not to mention water over here, they're a really good analogy, but for some reason that's a baddie, so I've taken that out. But this is level 3. I know it looks a bit like a toxic waste thing, but you can start to see level 2 down there, the capital delivery. We've got these transactional contracting, the data cycles, the data drops. You put in your performance management data set, we can now got performance reporting. So it means you can start to put these contracts into place. And you can start to see as well, we're thinking about our buildings, but we're also starting to think more and more about smart grids, portfolio management. We're starting to tie it into transportation, water, power, and people in terms of what we're doing. You know, so it's getting a bigger agenda as we move through. This is what kind of I think, you know, the future looks like. You know, and I think we'll start to see more and more. We'll start to see about, you know, we mentioned contracts performance based, and that's in terms of finance and procurement models. I think we'll see more and more of a sharing economy as well. We're starting to see the models starting to tie in maybe to your Outlook diary, and you'll start to maybe just rent a desk space. But we'll see, I think, more a bit click to procure of physical assets. I've got smart telemetry, linked up the digital model, and we'll start to see more and more the smart asset user, the crowdsourcing of data that's coming in. And we'll start to see us getting to more and more city-wide data, but it's the bits on the left-hand side that I think are really important. Real-time service demand evaluation and real-time asset performance evaluation. So that post-occupancy evaluation as it happens. So we come to real rapid cycles, but always about optimized performance. You can see there already some of the technology you can get for embedding these things into the roads to start to do that already. So this is actually, I think, well underway. And I think for us, it's about creating a good vision. You know, this rocket doesn't exist yet, but you can start to do that. And we're starting to do it with that level 3 with the supply chain, saying, here's the vision, now backward engineer it. You come up with solutions in terms of what that does. And we're starting to see the cloud as well in level 3, start to think more and more about real time, predictive analysis in terms of how our assets are going to perform, optimization of solutions, and ultra-rapid cycle times, the more rapid optioneering in terms of what we're doing, and potentially self-procuring. And I think we all see, you know, additive manufacturing, what's that going to do for us? And they're seeing more and more a move towards, you know, the automated plant as well. You think in terms of a backhoe loader, why does it just have to excavate? You know, could it not also print, if you like, a curb log as well? I think these are things that are going to be quite real. A couple of quick takeaways in terms of time then. So I think this is some of the lessons that we've learned in the UK. So number one in terms of BIM, always understand the purpose of your mission. Understand what the client and the supply chain is going to use the data for. And start with end in mind. Understand what data is needed to operate that asset. Think about the operational outcomes that are desired. Define the information that's in terms of these decision points, what the plain language questions, the digital transactions you want. And become very good at prescribing the data, if you like, and also know what data you actually have in terms of survey data right at the beginning. But try and create that climate for integration as well. It's not always about contract, you know, about the contract. There's some great stuff out there. BS 11,000, you know, the framework for collaborative engagement. And I think that's really important in that very beginning of the project, what we call the discovery stage. Alpha, well, put out if your client a very good employer's information requirement, setting out all these needs. And make sure the supply chain, you know, they're ready for it. You know, test their capability in terms of that information requirement. And also, you know, ensure there's somebody there, soft landing, somebody right at the very beginning from an operational aspect that can help embed that one. And ensure that these actually the requirements for BIM actually go into the, you know, it shouldn't be a nice to have, it should be something that's embedded into the contract or into the scope of service. And make sure everybody's agreed into that BIM execution plan right the way for your supply chain. And I think build for inclusion, you know, we said a big part of what we do is about open data standards, and that's why we, you know, COBE gives us inclusion in terms of what we're doing. Beta, well, you can't be a good MIDIT and you can't be another good acronym, but that master information delivery plan, so everybody knows how much data I'm delivering when, describing the geometric, that non-graphic information. And start to see, you know, as we've been doing today in terms of, well, over the week, building the prototypes, the team's done a great job in doing that. These rapid design charrettes, test them. Design the data, and you use that data to start thinking more and more about how you're going to design from it. Test it with others, you know, our soft landings, but query it. You know, the validation, really important. And you heard from Raphael, we think, you know, set up the big rooms or caves. We think trying to create that environment is really, really important. And try some lean working, you know, try to think about these integrated techniques and the work that Raphael showed. Once it's live, you know, did you get the data you wanted? Test it. How are you going to maintain it? Get it into a CAFM system. But make sure you've got a plan. You know, we mandated post-occupancy evaluation. Learn from your assets. A big part, you know, be able to turn it around. I'm sure you remember the Latham report, and that's what, you know, Michael said, you know, experience from other industries, you know, suggests that, you know, we've got to adapt. It's about human behaviour. It's a behavioural change. And someone showed that to me the other week. Apparently this is something I said back in 2011. And you kind of look back and say, well, did it make sense? I think that's a big danger. You know, it's not a technology discussion. BIM's actually, for me, it's been about a behavioural change programme, that heuristic bias of we've always kind of done it that way. And I think when you cut through it, you know, people really get technologies, we get there with the process, but it's still very much about trying to change your behaviours of what we're doing. So to sum up, well, you know, is it your future? Well, I think there's actually no turning back. It's about reshaping your digital present in terms of what you're doing. I think the big question you've got to ask at this, Ireland, are you on the right track for not BIM, but this digital transformation? And I think even if you are, the big thing that we are starting to see is, even if you're on that right track, this thing keeps moving at 100 miles an hour. We're finding that our programme, we're refining it, we're growing it every day. And I think probably the big conclusion is, I think the best way to predict an integrated future is to create it. As Mrs. Doyle said, go on, just do it. So thank you for hearing our story.
David. We have time for a couple of questions, but before we do, I just have to say that David's passion and his dedication to the BIM cause is very impressive, including staying out very late at night in Dublin pubs. He will go to no end to
find out what was happening in the local sort of thing. And
very good. So I'm sure we have some questions. We have two microphones here. Anybody got a question? One at the front here, Ray.
I can probably answer. I think Scotland will win tonight. Is that okay? Going for 2-0.
We'll forgive you for that one. How much of a barrier was the government procurement contracts to the rollout of the BIM, especially in the UK?
It's a good question, and I think one of the good things is rather than treating BIM in isolation, one of the other things we said we had to put in was new forms of procurement. So with all these level 2 contracts, we came up with forms of procurement that encourage early contractor engagement. So I think that was one of the big ones. We also made sure it worked with any existing contract as well. So for instance, that Minister of Justice trial project was PPC 2000. So we've got to work. So we've had to adapt some of that, encourage the use of more collaborative contracts that involve early contractor engagement. So it's been a big part of the journey as well. I think we're finding the more collaborative in nature of the contract, an NEC contract, the better the outcomes as well.
David, you mentioned your fitness videos. No.
I could sing one for you as well.
Do you have anyone on the task group who's focused on kind of integration of other areas into BIM, specifically what we were talking about in our project? We do actually. We've got, as you rightly say, we built up different work streams as well. So yeah, in terms of probably your one, a lot of it was around about the FM side of it and the laser scanning. So we'll pick up on the laser scanning. We've created a group that's called Survey for BIM, and it's headed up by a guy called Ian Bush, who's ICS, Institute of Civil Engineers Surveyors, and we've actually created it already, if you like, the client guide to procuring laser scanning surveys. And as you rightly say, actually how do we start to geotag it, and things like that, where do we get the value? So in a lot of cases, in terms of level of detail, it might not be, a model that is parametric. It might be the point cloud, the geotagging into it. But we're starting to build these communities of practice within there. We've also got the BIM for FM group that's starting to think to tie these together. So what we've done was started to build these teams in isolation. You had you had the survey group that's maybe looking at laser scanning, all the sort of techniques for that. We've had the BIM for FM. And now what we're doing is joining them all together. We've done the verticals, and now it's how to get somebody saying, right, we can do the surveying piece, but now we've got to know what data we want to tag and such like. And it was interesting, we're getting to that point where we're starting to test even, trying to automate the lookup of actually what am I scanning? Is it a valve or such like, using RGBs and such like. So interesting things, but we're starting to build these. So I can give you the document as well for the stuff that we've done. I think that's a big important part as well. When we put out the standards, government actually bought from BSI the right to use it and give it out to the supply chain free of charge. So no one had to go out and buy a standard at £200. It was all free.
I'll take two more, one here and one here. So whoever's first. Two more questions. Here first. Yeah.
How far are we away from Kobe being a finished product in terms of both building and infrastructure?
It's a good question. When we started the Kobe journey, we were conscious that it was mainly allied at the vertical marketplace. So we created a working group called Kobe for All, and so the Kobe for All was to start to put it into infra and start to think more and more about, rather than spaces, to think about it more in terms of chainage and such like. So that group has been up. We've got the British standard out now, but it's like anything, we're constantly refining and learning the lessons from it. So we're always getting feedback from our communities of practice and always refining such like. And I think it's a really, really good comment that we're finding that a lot of the infrastructure modelling is actually really, really advanced, but we're having to catch up a bit with things like IFC and the standards round about it. So we're constantly learning. But again, I think the big part that's going to help is going to be that digital plan of work. A lot of the clients won't have to see the engine of COBE. They'll just see that nice user interface. And a big part of the plan of work has been built very much for infrastructure, transportation, as well as, and I think that was always a danger that we couldn't just build a tool for our world of the vertical assets.
One more, just over here.
Yeah, I just have a question. You know, the UK mandated BIM on projects over a certain size value.
There's none.
There's none.
None. There's no value threshold.
Right. But for public projects. So just to understand, you said try not to leave the smaller practices and the smaller contractors behind. How are you ensuring that it's not just the big firms that are adopting BIM? How are the smaller, subbies and and if they're not on a big, high status £1 billion project, if they're just doing the local school extension or small works, how are they making them adopt BIM?
It's been funny actually. You would say, who are leading lights in this? I think we're seeing that, the big players went and bought it in, they buy resource and such like. The SMEs were found like speedboats. They were very quick and agile to actually adapt. But we've got a group called BIM for SME that's working with our SME community and help upskill them in terms of knowledge. But the big part for us, again, has been the use of COBE. Because you imagine if you're a manufacturer, you might be putting in an Excel template and supplying that within there. And actually, when you find out, a lot of the players in there are actually finding out there's lots of free tools. So it's been very much about us as a task group and a community as a practice, working with them, helping understand what their business case is there. Now, one of the big things that we set up was BIM regional hubs throughout the UK. There's one up in Belfast and such like. We do free seminars, we work with them to help them on their journey plan, and that's been key. And I don't know where Alan's went. And it's one of the things we've said, with Alan, that we want to try and continue, and we're speaking about, I'm putting words in Alan's mouth here, but trying to create somewhere down in Dublin, aren't we, Alan? You see Alan's nodding there. So, but we think they've been really important in terms of working with people and trying to demystify it, because I think it's it can be quite scary. And we do have on the Task Group website as well the costs. We've been very explicit saying if you want to do X, here's the sort of cost. Viewing might cost you nothing. If you're a super user, it's maybe creating a model. So we work with our technology partners. We've got a technology vendor eyes. So we put costs and return on investment. And I think that's sort of helped as well.
Actually, just a point with David, we were chatting last night about lots of things, but it's not just to keeping CITA inside the Pale, but moving out to the west, moving down to the south, and connecting with the north. So it's very important. We can see that in Waterford IT. We see that with Jim in GMIT and with the team in Letterkenny. So it's about connecting CITA right across the 26 counties and into Northern Ireland as well. That's important.
I think at this point we're a little behind schedule, but not too bad. I'd like to thank David again for an excellent talk. Very good. You're always welcome.